Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's SAARC Talk series on a very relevant topic, oral storytelling as a method for preserving Urdu's cultural, linguistic, and literary heritage, with special reference to Pakistan. I'm Bina Gandhi Deori, Deputy Director, SAARC Cultural Center, Sri Lanka. The SAARC Talk series aims to foster regional cultural integration, knowledge exchange in South Asia by providing this platform for experts to so that there is an exchange of topic relevant to South Asian heritage. In today's oral storytelling continues to be a vital medium safeguarding Urdu's rich heritage. Before we begin, a few reminders. Please keep your microphones muted throughout the lecture. You can post questions in the message box and we will address them during Q&A. Kindly note that this lecture is being recorded. So it is my pleasure to introduce Intsab Sahi, a renowned journalist who works as assistant editor at the News on Sunday. She has extensive experience of working with writers from different, who write on different topics, including history, health, education, human rights, culture, heritage. And her own regular contributions feature conservation efforts in the walled city, interviews with prominent literary figures, and she has also covered a lot of literary festivals in Pakistan. She's also a very experienced storyteller since 2018. Sahi has been working with the Story Kit program as a storyteller, as a writer, as a digital content creator. As a trainer for the UNESCO Girls' Right to Education program, she emphasizes the importance of introducing indigenous narratives through stories and music to preserve and diversify language. So, Ms. Sahi, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bina, first of all, for inviting me to be a part of the SAARC Culture and Heritage Talk series. It is an absolute honor and joy to be sitting here today in front of my other South Asian colleagues from all these diverse backgrounds and to be talking with them about a topic which is very close to my heart, but at the same time is very much part of the South Asian experience, because I've always felt that stories are a connecting force. And when we talk about narratives from within South Asia, they have always connected cultures beyond one. They have always been very collaborative, very a force that brings people together. It's an idea that brings people together. And my apologies to all the participants here, people who are here and they can't see me moving. There's a slight issue with our internet connection here, which is rather unfortunate. And because of that, the video quality is a bit, well, it's not that great as we'd like it to be, but I hope you can all hear me. And through this discussion, we can learn a little bit more about the role of Urdu storytelling and oral storytelling, particularly when it comes to preservation of languages, culture, and its heritage, its history, its linguistic nuances. So as Dr. Bina introduced me, I am a journalist, but more so, I think of myself as a storyteller, as a person who enjoys telling stories, who loved hearing stories growing up. And I'm sure that most of the participants here today they'd agree with me, because as I said, in South Asian communities, it is common for us to share stories with children when they're growing up in our households. And also in general, we love our tales, we love our stories, we love our epics and our legends and whatnot. And they have always served a greater purpose. They've always been a way of preserving cultural heritage. So I would like to start today's discussion with a story about a story that has truly made its way into Urdu oral literature and has truly transformed the way we view stories within the Urdu literary realm. And that story is of the one very famous epic, legendary epic called Dastane Amir Hamza. Dastane Amir Hamza, it is important to note here that when it comes to oral storytelling, whether it is in one language or the other, so all stories are coming from somewhere else. There's always, they start off somewhere and then they reach a plane, and then people of that area, of that community, of that language, people of that language make it their own, which makes stories so beautiful and poignant in nature, because they can be adapted, and cultures all over and all across the world can adapt them from other languages. So with Dastane Amir Hamza, why is it so important as far as Urdu literary oral traditions are concerned? Because it did not start out as a story which was Urdu based or was narrated initially in Urdu. It started out in the Middle East. It started out long before Urdu even was recognized, was even a language, or even the name Urdu was known. It started way before that. But what made it so significant for the Urdu speaking population was that once it reached the Indian subcontinent, and became was told by Urdu speaking storytellers to their communities, it became more than just a story of razm and bazm, as we call it in Urdu, or the story of love and war, as one with most epics, with most legends, even in the Homeric tradition, the Greek epics and whatnot. The idea, we expanded as a community, as a language, we expanded on the narrative that we were presented with. We got a story from the Middle East, from Persia, which was about this valorous, this very valiant, gallant, heroic figure named Amir Hamza. And we expanded by adding to it our own flavors and our own understandings from our own context. And we made it ours. We made it very much a tale told in Urdu. So now, a little bit about Dastane Amir Hamza. It can be traced back to the origins can be traced back from somewhere back in the 8th and 7th and the 8th and 9th century. But moving forward, once it reached the Indian subcontinent during the Mughal Emperor, it reached long before that, but it became very well known during the Mughal Emperor Akbar's period. Reason being, once he was told the story, he was fascinated by the tales, by the kissas within. Kissa is essentially a smaller narrative within an epic. So he was so fascinated by those tales that he even ordered. He commissioned this artistic project of a grand artistic project, in fact, where a lot of these tales from Dastane Amir Hamza, or as we call it in English, the Adventures of Amir Hamza, were then transformed into print, and they were painted over. And these were large paintings, unlike most Mughal art, which was very miniature, which is based on miniature styles. This one was different. It was massive in scale. But what made Dastane Amir Hamza so significant was that now it was being told in the Indian subcontinent in Urdu, and people were using that story to weave more tales. Because as one of our colleagues here in Pakistan, Musharraf Ali Farooqi, often says that we're connected to this ancient idea of a story tree. No story is ever told in isolation. There are always more stories to be generated from a given story. So once it reached this area, we added as I said, our own flavor, our own flair to the tale to this epic tale of love and war, razm and bazm. We added to it two new concepts. We added the lism, which is an enchanted realm, a realm beyond human comprehension, created by sorcerers, very enchanting in nature. And then we also added to it trickstery or ayari. We added, and again, it's important to note here that when we say trickstery, we do not, it's different from sorcery. Trickstery was more imaginative in nature. It required great deal of brains, and luckily enough, in the Indian subcontinent and the context that we had, and the way language was devised and the way the culture was, we were able to add elements of that into Dastane Amir Hamza, and became very popular and very well known amongst not just Urdu speakers but all over the Indian subcontinent. And eventually this process of telling of tales orally, transmitting Dastan-e-Mir Hamza by the storytellers, who were, by the way, called Dastan Go. And Dastan Go, Dastan Go is the storyteller, and Dastan Goi, as the oral storytelling tradition, particularly that of epics, goes, Dastan Goi loose translates into Dastan being the story and Goi to tell. So you are telling a story. So now Dastan Goi became very popular, and eventually during the 1800s, when print had already come into the Indian subcontinent, Munshi Naval Kishore decided that let's put all these oral tales into a written form, like let's bring them into print. And by doing so, it was again a preservation of literary heritage. But again, of note is that it's oral heritage being put together in a literary written format. So what happened with that, once Munshi Naval Kishore gathered these oral storytellers, people who were telling Dastan Gos, and asked them to come up with a written version of the tale, these oral storytellers kept adding to the story, because that's the beauty of oral storytelling. It is very performative in nature. It is again very, very important in the sense that it allows for, even in non-literate communities, it is a way of passing, or it is a way of helping communities learn languages, and not just languages but also the literature of those languages. The context they are written in, the context they're told in, is very specific to communities that they are told to. So when these oral storytellers were helping put together this written version of the Dastan, they on the spot would add more tales or add more kissas to this epic. And that eventually led to the birth of a 46 volume Dastan, this single cycle of tales, but 10 volumes and 40 10 volumes worth of these this epic, and each volume was about 1,000 pages, and 1,000 pages meant that there were 46,000 in total pages of this epic, and so many tales, so many kissas, so many stories within that epic, because they were all told by different storytellers. So they had all brought in their own additions and their own creativity into this this piece of literature that we now had. So once Dastane-e-Mir Hamza was written down and circulated, it eventually, but it continued to be a very, very orally passed down story. People were still telling the tale, but as Shamsur Rahman Farooqi Saab would have argued, one of the problems that we have faced, as many in the South Asian community, as far as our colonial past goes, eventually our literature was disparaged and considered not as serious. And when we say serious, because in the Anglophone tradition we had novel, we had short stories. What was missing was this idea of a dastan, because a dastan does not necessarily have a beginning or an end. It's a continuous tale. You can add to it, you can take from it, you can build on it. It's part of that oral tradition. It's very much ever evolving. Well, it wasn't truly well received by the colonial establishment, and they thought that this is not literature which is worth much. However, that did not stop people from telling the story, and it continued, but slowly and gradually faded into the background. The whole tradition itself, with the passing of Mir Baqir Ali, one of the last legendary storytellers of the Indian subcontinent. He passed away in 1928, and with his demise, we lost the tradition a bit. And in recent decades, there has been a movement, there's been an effort put together by, it started out with Shamsur Rahman Farooqi's rereadings in his work on Dastan literature, and then Mahmood Farooqi from India taking over and starting this, in a way, reviving this entire tradition of Dastan Goi. And in Pakistan, thanks to Musharraf Ali Farooqi's contribution, for the first time, Dastane-e-Mir Hamza, and it's there is a one volume, Dastane-e-Mir Hamza. Not everybody needs to read those 10 volumes and 46,000 pages. And well, if you want to, go ahead, it's beautiful. And you can also maybe add another section to it and come up with another tale of Hamza's Wala and Amar's trickstery. Anything can be done. But when in 2007, Musharraf Ali Farooqi translated the one volume Dastan available. Um, um, and that one is by Ghalib Lakhnavi and Abdullah Bilgirami. He translated that one volume into what is now known as the Adventures of Amir Hamza, and it is one of the most prominent texts available today, and it has truly helped our Western readership also get an understanding of what literature or what this tradition of storytelling has been for Urdu, because Musharraf has been able to translate the nuances of the language into English. He has remarkably, and I'd encourage, if people ever get a chance here, that our participants ever get a chance, they do give it a read if they haven't yet. He's maintained that very flexible nature of the narrative through in his translation, which is a difficult feat to achieve, because translating an epic which was orally transmitted into another language altogether takes a lot of work and takes a lot of effort. But for the first time now, the Western readership and other readership in other languages also have a complete text from Urdu language, which cultivated this narrative and introduced enchanted kingdoms and extraterrestrial realms to the world. And again, a classic epic piece of classic literature is now here, and it is very, very diverting in nature. It is very, very innovative as well. It allows for reconsiderations and reclamation at the same time. The Dastan continues to be a source of great joy, because when the Dastan goes perform it anywhere in the world today, thanks to Mahmood Farooqi and his team, and here in Pakistan, when Dastan Goi sessions are held, when performers are performing, it is still being passed down and is still helping the language evolve and maintain its integrity. Now, coming back to what I said earlier about the fact that there is no story that is ever told in isolation. We're all connected to, and I'm borrowing here from Farooqi's idea of a larger ancient story tree, because if you notice, there are similar patterns to be observed in tales all across the globe, and it's not just one culture. There are similar patterns and sequences that can be observed in tales from all parts of the world. So, for instance, if there's a Shakespearean romance and you take examples from Punjab of today, even though there is no connection, but the story is the same. So it's about a girl and a boy from two different social stratas, and they are fighting against the system, and they're trying to come together. And you find a similar sequence, a similar story here too, which kind of tells us that people have not thought of storytelling formulas individually. They have been collectively thought of at some point. At some point, a huge body of tales was dispersed, and it reached regions all across the globe. And now these dispersed tales were received by different cultures and then shared with other cultures at times, and within communities, and they became larger than life in themselves. So again, when these cultures receive those stories, for instance, here I am comparing Shakespearean romances and to what we have here in Urdu and Punjabi literature. Love tales are very popular in from where I come from, in Punjab, Pakistan, whether it's Hi Ranjha or Sasi Puno, there's so many. Or Mirza Sahiba, all of them are very, very popular. And now we notice when we're reading those tales, it is similar to what we have elsewhere in the world, which again, it reinforces the idea that these tales, concepts, storytelling formulas are shared amongst the world's communities, not just the South Asian community, but all across the globe. That's the beauty of storytelling. You can connect with people all over the world, even if language is often or can be seen as a barrier. Like if I'm narrating a story in Urdu, there's a possibility that somebody from another part of the world will not be able to understand it. But what they can understand is the expression of it. And once language is, and even within the country, Pakistan has a large population of Urdu speakers across the border. India has a great number of Urdu speakers. There's a great number of Urdu speaking diaspora across, living all over the world. So yes, there are many people who but then again, Urdu is not as it is preserved. There are speakers, but there is still a chance of growth because not everybody is that well versed here in and again with it is important to again note that in most South Asian communities, we are born into bilingual systems. We are born into trilingual family systems where more than one language is spoken very regularly in the households, and even in communities outside, it is common practice. So for instance, I can speak for myself. I wasn't born into an Urdu speaking household. I was born into a Punjabi speaking household. But at the same time, I was taught Urdu because Urdu not only happens to be the national language of Pakistan, but it is also the language that has been passed down to people for generations and generations. And it has helped cultivate this culture, particularly this literary culture, which is why a lot of the stories I was told growing up were in Urdu, even though I was coming from Punjabi household. And similarly, in most South Asian communities, we see that there is this. So then again, why I'm saying that it's important and it's of note that we though know Urdu, there's still a lot of room for growth because Urdu is a growing, evolving language. It can be brought into contemporary consciousness with newer tales, with newer stories. Okay, and now coming back to the fact that we're connected to an ancient tradition, and that tradition of stories is connected to more traditions. And it's necessary to understand that none of these traditions of storytelling, none of these stories, they did not start just a century ago. They did not start 2 centuries ago. As with Dastane Mir Hamza, we have a 1300-year-old history. Goes back in time, a long time. So none of these traditions, none of these stories they're not new. These are ancient traditions and they've held on for centuries, and there's a reason for that. Because these narratives appeal. And these narratives, when told orally, can be assessed. So every time we're telling a story, if today we tell the story of Hamza to a contemporary audience, we can change it because we can modify it. We can ensure that or any tale for that matter, which brings me to the idea of kissa and the idea of how kissas are told. Now, kissa is very much like a short story and very much not like a short story at the same time, as we know, as far as the Anglophone tradition of stories goes. A kissa doesn't need to be necessarily didactic. It isn't. Sometimes they're just tales told for the sake of telling stories. And they can be characters which aren't truly, they don't have a strong moral grounding at times. But then these are characters which are ever evolving because they're part of the oral tradition. So you can take a story from, let's say, 200 years ago, a kissa from 200 years ago, and transform it and tell it in a way which is very much suited for our contemporary audiences, which is very much suited for our current day situation. And again, as the story tree idea goes, as the notion of connectivity of traditions, of storytelling traditions is concerned, we can always see similar patterns, and we can use those patterns and tell tales of relevance today in languages that need definite preservation because they're not relics of the past. They're very much living and breathing in nature. They're very much evolving and growing every single day, and they have newer speakers coming into to the they're coming in every single day, and they're becoming part of this language's tradition. Now, when I talk of the kissa, a kissa is, how is it different from a short story? A kissa is very anecdotal in nature, and it can be taken as with the dastan. I said that there are kissas within dastan, and any kissa can be a story in its own right. It does not need to be connected to this larger epic. The same way, any kissa that we have can be told as a standalone story, or it can be part of a bigger narrative, which now brings me to these recent works, again, in Pakistan, much credit goes to Musharraf Ali Faruqi for keeping stories and kissas of Urdu alive, because in his recent works, he has Musharraf Ali Faruqi is, if I'm not mentioned yet, he's not just a translator, he's an author, a lexicographer, and he has really, 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 over the years, worked on ensuring that Urdu literature and literary heritage remains available to people all across the globe, and which is why his translation works have really, really helped get Urdu narratives to a broader audience and a broader readership. So Kissana recently, with the support of Getz Farmer, Musharraf took 6 stories, 6 kissas, and translated them into English, but at the same time made available their Urdu texts. And now it's again another time I'm mentioning, these kissas weren't always available in the written text form. They were orally transmitted, and their authorship is often not known. If there was a text available, often enough the author is unknown, because, well, somebody once told this story and somebody heard it from someone, and then it kept getting passed on and eventually found its way into literature, into written in a written form, and here we have it now. So one kissa that as I said, that we can make these stories very, very relevant. The purpose is to ensure that obviously there's a culture associated with every language. Urdu has its own flair, its own flair. It's often thought of the language of romance and poetry because, well, it started out as that. Rekhta, which Urdu was known as for the longest time. Urdu as a name came much later. And before that, the language was known by different names, and one of the most popular, most significant names was Rekhta, but Rekhta also denotes poetry in the ghazal form. So so Rekhta again becomes a very lyrical form of language's presentation. And now, why the kissa, and which kissa has truly stayed with me? There are several, but bringing these kissas into modern consciousness is important. So then our next generations, as one of my colleagues once said, do not face a sense of languagelessness. Because once you lose the tradition of your own of language, of that story, there's a sense of loss of expression too. So it is absolutely imperative that we tell stories of a certain culture in that culture's language, because that would then help people express themselves, and also help languages evolve with time, as the need of the time goes. So coming back to the recently translated kissas, there's this kissa of an innkeeper, a woman called Chabili Bhatiari. And again, not didactic in nature at all. But it's a story, it's a tale as old as time. It's about 2 women fighting against social systems, stratums. That they the concept is the same. It is as simple. There is a man involved, and there are 2 women who are trying to win him over. They already have him, but they're still trying to. And but what's interesting is that this kissa from hundreds of years ago is also thematically very similar to what we have today. All sorts of literature, all sorts of stories that we have today. It also it touches upon understandings of, though it's not told in the same way, because coming from a time far gone. But today, when we read it or when we narrate it, we know that we are focusing on ideas of misogyny, of patriarchy, of concepts that have recently, to some extent, come into modern, to social consciousness. And before that, they weren't as well known. They were understood, which is why Kissa Chabili Bhatiari still holds space and is still something that can be told to people over and over again. But it is also very important to note here that by owning the idea of a kissa told in Urdu, or as part of Urdu's literary heritage, we are trying to not subliminate our literature into that Anglophonic identity that has been very much prevalent for years. And so coming back to the Kissa narrative, there are also other stories. There's Kissa Sipahizada. There is also another one called Kissaik Ayara Ka. Again, Ayara, trickstery, going back to Dastan narratives, going back in time, the idea of Tilism, of Razam Bazam Tilis Mayari, all of those concepts persist. And we can, in today's time, take from that tale, take from that kissa, make it modern, and tell it to people. Because it is very contemporary. If somebody ever asks us, is that tale contemporary enough? Is it for the audience of today? Is it for the readership of today? Well, yes, that is the beauty of oral storytelling. That is the beauty of orally transmitted literature. It can be transformed, it can be played around with. It is not set in stone. It is something that is very moving, very fluid, very naturally flexible. So, from there on, I think it is important to understand that we can reinterpret tales to suit the sensibilities of our times. And that is, again, a great way of not just preserving cultural heritage of these stories passed down through these stories, but at the same time of furthering language that they're told in. Now, kissas, stories, they're not, kissas and dastans are not always, well, they're mostly, kissas and many of them are for adult readership and adult audiences because they do deal with themes of adult concerns. But then there are people here in Pakistan, and I'm proud to be a part of that group of people. And again, thanks to my colleagues here, there are stories being told to children to ensure that they also acquire language. They also learn Urdu through project-based, through storytelling-based project. And that brings me to StoryKit, my work with StoryKit, and also what StoryKit has been doing for children of Pakistan, particularly when it comes to language acquisition and promotion of Urdu. So StoryKit started out in year 2020, in 2015. It is an activity-based learning project, but more so than anything, it is a storytelling-based project. So storytellers who are working for StoryKit here in Pakistan, before anything else, I must tell you that it first piloted in a very remote part of Punjab, Muzaffargarh, where storytellers from the StoryKit program went and told stories in Urdu to these children from informal schools, informal educational setups. And informal educational setups here are the ones where teachers are holding classes in their homes, in their own spaces. These schools really, these educational institutions don't really have again any formal support, but they exist, and there the storytellers went and told stories. And what was amazing and very, very uplifting to see was that these children started engaging with those stories. And when we talk of people, particularly from interior regions, who've not been exposed to, these children were not exposed to much literature. They were not exposed to even Urdu as a language as much. When they were told stories in Urdu, they grasped on, because these stories allowed them to experience creatively, and they allowed them to experience naturally, imaginative. They allowed them to imagine for once. And that is why oral storytelling is so important, because it allows for imagination to grow. It allows for creative expression. It allows for linguistic expression. But at the same time, it allows for people to feel, see, and experience things that they've not at times. And it allows for, they are a reprieve. And storytelling is supposed to regale, it's supposed to entertain and educate. So the purpose is never just performative, it's not performance, it's not just meant to entertain, it's always meant to educate. So thanks to Musharraf al-Faruqi and his team here in Pakistan, when they started out this project, and they visited schools all over Pakistan and told stories. Most of them were folk tales, passed down generations to generation, like from one generation to another, like the story of Podna and Podni, these two little birds, but and then the story of this princess called Bengan Shahzadi or Princess Aubergine. Some of them are translated, others, again, with oral storytelling, as we can do. We can take stories from other sources, we can source them from other materials, translate them into Urdu, make them our own, and use them as a way of furthering linguistic preservation, cultural preservation of literature and literary heritage of a language. So the Story Kit project, I've been associated with it for several years now, and what I've noticed in my work, specifically in urban centers, it's different. Even within the country, when it comes to Urdu, it's different from how it's perceived in other regions. Because in urban centers, there are more formal schools. There are also private education institutions which heavily focus on English, and rightly so, because it is how things are as far as language and learning goes. And it's not just the case of Pakistan. I'm certain we as South Asian members of the South Asian community can all agree that it's common practice. We do have English medium schools all across the board. But in these urban centers, when a storyteller goes to a private school and tells children that we are going to today tell you a story in Urdu, the and as I noticed in my work, the initial reaction is, oh, it's in Urdu, it'll be difficult. No, because, well, we've associated a certain sense of difficulty with with Urdu, because Urdu, again, story, language of romance, of poetry, of ghazal, it being rekhta. But then you tell them that no, we are here to tell you a story, and it's simple. You hear it, and if you don't understand, you let us know. And it's our job to help you understand. It's our job to ensure that you learn new words today, that you learn how to express yourself in a language which is very not only, again, the national language of your country, but also at the same time very much an important historical has historical significance. So we are going to tell you a story in Urdu, and oftentimes we notice that children start to enjoy themselves. They learn new words, they acquire language through that process of a story, of storytelling. They acquire this new love for language during those sessions. And not only do they, because the model is designed in such a way that not only is the storyteller supposed to go in and tell a story to these children, they're also supposed to then allow for, added creative expression. Oftentimes, children are asked to retell the story in their own words. And it is a joy to see that those children, particularly in all English medium schools, when they come up to you and say, oh, I want to tell the story, I want to tell the story, because they've heard the story just once from a storyteller. Why is it so popular? Again, the performative nature of oral storytelling. If I were to just tell you a story, I'd sit down and tell you, oh, this is what, and this happened, and that happened, and this character did this or did that, and whatever. It's different. But when a story is told orally and in a performative way, in an interactive way, it becomes much more alive. It's much more entertaining, and it allows for learning at a quicker pace. Because now, particularly when you're dealing with a school situation, when in a school situation, when in a school around children, and you want children to learn the language, and you take your sweet time performing that story for them, it becomes a lot easier for them to understand, to grasp, and to enjoy, and to remember. And I've noticed in all my work, and not just personally, but all my colleagues who have worked as storytellers, and they can vouch for this. We have noticed a growth, this need in children to learn more. They're not just hearing stories, they're learning their language. They're learning a language in a way which is so fun for them. And that's the beauty of oral storytelling. And now comparing what we see in English medium schools to what we see in informal schools or in street schools, schools for in underprivileged communities here, is that children are the same. They are willing to learn, they're willing to grasp on. They just need a way, a method which is easier for them to grasp. If we, and it goes for all languages, it's not just Urdu we're talking about. Obviously, for the sake of today's discussion, we are talking about Urdu, but when it comes to all South Asian languages, all languages all across the globe, I think one of the best ways of preserving that language and ensuring that our next generations are familiar with it and they carry on that language's heritage is by telling them tales. They are the easiest way of getting the language across, and making sure that people get familiar with the nuances, the poignancy of the language they're born into. And sometimes not. It can be somebody's second language, and they can still learn to love it as much. As with a lot of translators of Urdu literature, we've seen, and I'd like to mention Daisy Rockwell, who has been translating Urdu and Hindi literature even into English, and she is very fluent in both languages. So you don't have to be born into a language to love that language and to know that language. And as far as the StoryKit program goes, StoryKit has not only been working with schools, it's also worked digitally to produce, again, particularly when COVID hit and during the pandemic, every schools were shut down, and there was a definite concern as to safety, and in-person sessions were not possible. Kit came up with the idea of story time, and there many storytellers joined hands, and then to tell stories in Urdu, myself included, my colleagues, including from colleagues from across the border, from India, from Pakistan, everywhere. People joined in hands and they told stories to children. And it was, again, a great way of reaching out to students who are sitting at home and now waiting when would these storytelling sessions would resume. They wanted that to happen, and all these children joined in to sit for those storytime sessions digitally this time around. I have been asked many times to tell the story of Molka Dio Sahab. People who ever saw that video there, or the story of Peng and Shahzadi, I've had to tell that a million times to children because they seem to enjoy that. And not only do they enjoy that, they keep fixating on the characters, these magical, fantastical characters. And again, when we think of oral storytelling and language, and the fact that I mentioned the idea of Urdu enhancing what was given to it, like Urdu storytellers enhancing the content they were given by adding ideas and contextual meaning from the subcontinent, by introducing the notions of tilism and ayari to Dastan. These stories of very fantastical nature. This, again, fantasy. They were fantastical. They were enchanting. They were unreal, as some would call them. But the fact that they were fantasy based, fantasy is also a commentary. It is also a very subtle way of commenting on many cultural nuances and ideas and notions within communities. So even if they were taken from somewhere which is not, let's say, real, or as some would contest, serious and more imaginative, they still allowed for discussions to erupt, for concerns to be raised, for concepts to be challenged. And all of that was done orally. And they were also a great way of ensuring that language continues to grow. And with the StoryKit program, that has been the aim. The language continues to grow, and children continue to learn Urdu and learn to love Urdu. And it's a great privilege to see that change occurring, to see children learning and enjoying a language which to some may seem daunting because, well, alphabet can be a bit tough, but that goes for almost all languages. Urdu also reserves its challenges. There are concerns when it comes to the written form, but orally transmitted, it's much easier to preserve. It is much easier to grow. It is much easier to evolve for that language when it's transmitted orally, in particularly in form of stories. Which now brings me to a very important concern here. Why storytelling? Why do I say that oral storytelling is the way to go about preserving a language? It's not like we have to print anything. Oral storytelling, or the economy of oral storytelling, is not at all capital based. We don't need a lot of investment. Storytellers do not, stories orally told do not require print. They do not require any monetary investment. All they need is a storyteller. All they need somebody who knows their language and they're interested in performing that language and telling tales from that language and developing on those stories. The economy of storytelling is very, very simple. It's very understandable. You have nothing to, and there's no need for investment. Whether even governments, when storytelling sessions are held anywhere, what do people need? What do storytellers need? They need a room full of audience. They need people who be willing to sit down and have a good time hearing a story, and in the process learning a language, in the process preserving a language's culture, in the process preserving heritage of a language. So nothing is needed. A room, a place, sometimes not even a brick and mortar, not a physical space. They just need audiences. They just need people who'd be willing to sit and hear. And what is to gain? What is to be gained from this process? Education. In many cases, particularly when we see non-literate communities and in non-literate communities, it is a great way of educating people. Informal schools also are important here to, they need to be noticed because these are not places where formal education is easily expandable, or it's something that can be, and obviously in South Asia we've had challenges, and Pakistan is still facing major crises when it comes to out of school children. But maybe this is one way we can bring back children into our schools by, and we've noticed that, by the way, working with StoryKit, there are a lot of children, particularly in areas where education is not so readily available and where education is still lagging. In those areas, in those remote areas, when children learn that a storyteller will come to their school and tell them a story, teach them something, and particularly with the StoryKit program, the children also get story kits. These are little boxes with small little illustrated versions of these tales, along with the board game. So once they hear that there is a storyteller coming to their schools, they just find more fascinating and they like learning them, and they like to come to school, because in a lot of these places, children from underprivileged backgrounds are not encouraged to go to school, but it is one way of bringing them into schools. It is a one way of ensuring that they're educated and they learn something. And what better than learning language? Because once an individual knows a language, once Urdu, for instance, in our case, is known, the creative imaginative process becomes much easier. As long as you have command over language, you can from there on do so much. And that is why I feel and understand from the experiences that I've had over the years that oral storytelling is one of the best possible ways of preserving Urdu's heritage and also ensuring that that our children are not just they find a platform where they are getting educated, but not in the most it's not a conventional way of teaching. It is very project based. It is a way of ensuring that language is learned. But at the same time, it is a way of ensuring that education becomes accessible in a language which happens to be the language of about 230 million people across the board. So it's the number is definitely not small. And for that reason, it is extremely important that we try preserving Urdu's linguistic and literary heritage in all ways possible, but it is much easier to do so when done through the medium of storytelling orally, most significantly. So, yes, oral storytelling remains at the heart of how a language can be saved from it's Urdu is not going anywhere because we have seen the revival of Dastan Goi. We've seen this immense interest in Urdu-based festivals here in Pakistan, whether it's a Faiz Adabi Mela or it's the Pakistan Literary Festival. We've been noticing for years now that people and it's fascinating to see that of the number of people who line up to attend these sessions at Urdu festivals, Urdu-based festivals, or even learning festivals, and Urdu mushairas, because again, a mushaira, which is a very Bazmi gathering, lovers of the language, people of poetry, again, language of poetry and romance. It is fascinating to see when hundreds of people, young persons, are lining up to attend a mushaira, to attend a Dastan voice session, to attend a storytelling session. It tells you that there is still a language which is living, breathing, and continuously evolving, and has people who, more than anything, in awe of it, are embracing it, and they want to learn it, and they want to ensure that it continues to grow. So yes, with that, I think we can all, in particularly here, today as part of this lecture, can understand that Urdu storytelling, oral storytelling, is one way to go about linguistic preservation, and is one of the most fascinating, easier, no monetary investment required endeavor. It is simple. It is and what it gives eventually to the population, to a language's culture, is that it remains intact, and it grows. It grows.
Thank you, Intsab, for that enlightening presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Beena.
Thank you for sharing the wonderful reflections and also for sharing your experience as a storyteller. Yes, as you have rightly said, and agree with you when you say that this storytelling is kind of when you don't there is no monetary investment into it, but it gives so much in return. So as you said, storytelling is one of the is the earliest and the most enduring form of education and cultural preservation, and ancient form of sharing knowledge, culture. So thank you very much for your insight. Now we'll open the floor for questions and discussions. So please, if any of the online audience, if you have questions, please write it in the message box down below, then one by one, and the speaker will respond. So, and Insa, when you are talking about this Dastane Mir
Amir Hamza.
Hamza,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay, so shall I ask then, Beena ji?
Yes, Sangeeta,
Okay.
please go ahead.
Yeah, this
Keep your
presentation,
question focused and
okay,
conscious.
sure,
I hope if we
sure,
have other
sure.
also questions too. Yeah.
Okay, so this was, this oral storytelling, it was beautifully said. And all our cultures, we have this oral folk tales or stories, right? And I agree with everything. It's not that I do not agree, but my question is, when we listen to the folk stories, when the folk stories or those oral stories come down, how necessary is it that we modify the contents of the story? I think at some point you said we could modify it to suit the present time, right? So
Yes,
is that even necessary? Like, because I would say, like, use the folk tales, use the myth to kind of understand. We evoke the folk tales and stories to kind of understand the present, right? So
absolutely.
you look at the Native American writers, like Silko, or like like
Hmm.
kind of magic realism it would turn into, right? Like
Absolutely.
Marquez's stories. So is that even necessary? I understand about preserving the language, Urdu, right? That I completely agree. But about modifying, transforming the contents, I find that hard to take in. So if you could explain
Hmm.
that, please. Thank
Um,
you.
Oh, thank you for your question. It is, you're definitely right, madam. It is not necessary that we modify the content always, because these stories hold a lot of meaning and they hold a lot of value. And as you rightly pointed out, because they evoke certain concepts and certain ideas and certain notions that have been passed down in folklore over generations, over centuries, we don't always have to modify, but it depends on the audience we're dealing with. Because when it comes to oral storytelling, my only concern is that sometimes when if there's a kissa which is more suited, it is again, we have to focus on age appropriate stories. So if I'm telling a story to children, it cannot be the same story that I tell adults. But if it's a kissa that was meant for children and now I am performing it for an adult audience, I will maybe make some changes
Mm.
accordingly. Or if it is a kissa that I've been given and it's a folk tale which I feel is more suited for a particular age group or a particular for a particular context, I can all I said was that it is the beauty of oral storytelling that you can modify if need be. It's not necessary at all, because you do want to preserve the literary integrity of the piece that you've been given. You want to do that, and
Exactly.
that is the
Yeah.
best way of going about it. But there are certain situations where maybe a storyteller will have to, think a little and change the story a little bit, not the story itself, but change a couple of things here and there, which has been done by Dastan Gos for centuries. So it's just that we don't really have to, not always.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So in addition to that, I'll also ask a question to Intsab,
Yes, ma'am.
because you are also a digital content creator, right? So
Okay.
what I was wondering is that kind of how can these digital tools can support preservation efforts for this kind of, the
Yeah.
stories, or I mean, or what role does social media play in
Hmm.
this modern narratives? I mean, just to make it, I mean, like relevant.
Oh, absolutely. Social media and all these modern tools that we have available at our
Yeah.
disposal today. Can, they have a very, very significant role to play here. When we The first thing is that now they make stories accessible, right? One doesn't need to attend a Dastan Goi session to actually know what the Dastan is about. They can digitally become a part of it. But at the same time, because we are observing patterns and we are observing patterns of language, and on social media, we see it's again, the language is a little bit different. So you take your cues from there and
Mm.
you create content which is again more suitable for a digital audience. And that means it's not only reaching the speaker of that language, but it's going
Mm.
all over,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
You have greater challenges and also greater support when it comes to diversifying or diversification of linguistic heritage, because you get to experience what people from, let's say, 10 countries across, have to say, and social media, because of its connectivity and because of its availability, and also the fact that these digital tools, particularly tools, animation related tools, can also come in handy. You are orally telling a story, but at the same time, now you can, you do not need a Hamzanama. You don't need artists to sit down and draw. You can use animations, and you can use those ideas, and you can use the imagery either available or create something and add more flavor to the stories you're telling, and that way make them more engaging and more, again, something way more accessible to not just the audience of a particular area, but all across the globe. So it is the very you can use social media, can be used as a tool of connecting these tales and connecting, making these stories a lot more undistort, to making them something that is to helping them find a place in a greater context. As I said, that it is the idea of the story tree. We're all connected to ancient traditions. We're all connected through stories. So social media can just be the way of going, of actually now building on the branches of that story tree, adding more to it through the tools available to us.
And Insa, when you talk about this introducing these indigenous narratives through stories,
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. So I'll just like ask. I'll just share my experience what I had last week. So because we have this in the library, we go this every Saturday. We can volunteer for kind of story sharing with the kids who come to the library. So last Saturday it was my turn, and I was these kids, they go and they bring a storybook to you and you read it out to them. So she brought the story of Snow White. And when I was reading the story, and after a point, I really realized kind of, because here you know the story, right? The Queen Mother keeps on asking, who is the fairest of all. And I'm talking to this bunch of South Asian kids with like brown skin.
Yes.
So I found it very difficult to go kind of along with the story. Kind of, it's like, who is the fairest of all?
Exactly.
And the story of Rapunzel with the golden hair, like, that is the standard of like a beautiful girl. So it's
Yes.
very difficult to kind of, so that's what I feel, these indigenous kind of stories, we need to introduce them where we have our own heroes and kind of,
Exactly.
heroes and sheroes, as they say.
Exactly. I absolutely agree with you there, Dr. Beena. It is because, again, there is this need for assertion of South Asian identity through the stories we tell. Our children, yes, for years we've been, again, with our considering our colonial past and everything that we as communities have been through, it is extremely important that we tell children stories from regions they come from, as you said, heroes of their from places they know, of the again, the Anglophone identity of narratives, of stories, of short stories. There's nothing wrong with that. They exist and they are definitely part of a certain culture. But do they really resonate with
Yeah.
a child born into South Asian household? Not really, because yes, the color of our skin is definitely not what Snow White had. So it makes it is, again, stories are also an assertion of identity and a South Asian heritage. So yes, very much so, there's a need for contextualizing stories and telling stories from the places we come from,
Yeah.
and preserving that folklore, the stories of our regions.
Thank you. So I think Nabiha, please go ahead.
Yeah. So my question is from Intsab. I really appreciate how she has narrated the storytelling and how they have actually reached out. So we can actually see the impact that, when they're telling it to the kids these days. What I want to ask her that, when she's telling the story to these children, how are they able to relate to those, because their kissas are coming from a certain timeline, set a chronological order. And what they are watching is a very Disneyfication version of stories. So there is I really want to see what is her observation regarding that gap.
Thank you, Dr. Nabiha. In all honesty, I've noticed that what happens when you go into a school and you tell children that we're about to tell you a story, which is from, let's say it's a folk tale, but we don't tell them that. We start off with the story of let's say Molka Deo Sahab. And now Molka Deo Sahab is Molka, the gentle giant who owns a bakery. It's a story that they've heard elsewhere too. As I said, stories are all connected. So yes, they're exposed to the Disneyfied version of stories and tales, but they've heard of a gentle giant somewhere, and they're able to understand that, oh, okay, now Mulka is from here. Mulka is this gentle character, and he owns a bakery, and they understand. It's all about contextualizing literature. It is a folk tale. It is a story that comes from somewhere else. It is a story that we've had for years and years and years, and it's been passed down from generations. But these children were not exposed to it, and now you are telling them this story. But because it is told in a fashion, in a way which is understandable for them. When I tell they've heard of many stories, and it's not just about Molka Deo Sahab. It can be, if I tell them a story of Podna and Podni, of two birds, they still hear it, because even though these are folk tales, they still bring to them the same they bring on similar questions that are raised in all other stories. Only difference is that they are from here. They're not coming from the Western tradition. They're not coming from somewhere else. They are very much indigenous, they're very much from here. It is, in all honesty, not easy. Sometimes they do face difficulties, because they ask you, oh, but isn't this how, but this is not how it goes. It is always, because as I said, not all stories are didactic. When it in the Kissa tradition, they're not. Then there are morally ambiguous characters. There are characters that have there are character, it's not always good versus evil. It can be anything, which is why Urdu storytelling is different from its Anglophone counterparts. It's different because it's not always didactic. There's not always good and evil. It's just, sometimes it's just characters doing things and playing tricks and having fun. So sometimes, yes, we do face difficulties, but from what I've noticed, what I've seen is that children cling on. They are more than willing to jump on the bandwagon, and they're more than willing to enjoy the tale of Podna and Podni. And they're very much on the same ride as Podna and Podni, and then trying to figure out how to get away from this king who wants to take Podni away. And they're all, because as with oral storytelling, I mentioned, it's performative. So you're interacting and you're performing. You're not just telling a story, which is why it becomes easier for them to grasp too. So even if it is not something that they're familiar with, and it is not something which is a regular part of their vernacular at this point, they still find engagement in it because you are performing it for them. And that's a performance is a very, very important part of oral storytelling traditions. So I think from my experience at least, these stories, we have to keep that in mind though. Sometimes we do give examples of stories that they keep hearing these days, or the ones that they're exposed to. We do draw comparisons when we're telling stories. We do draw on notions that they already, on concepts that they have, and that's possible because, again, we are living in a time where a lot of options of entertainment, of learning, of a lot of exposure is there to stories from different parts of the world. So it really, really is a process, and you learn with your audience. That's, again, the beauty of oral storytelling. Even when you're doing it for children, you learn from your audience. You take cues from them. As with most performing arts, you take cues from your audience and you go with that. I hope that clarifies the concern a little bit. And if not, I'd love to expand on it.
So, hello, Nabiha. I think that Intsab response is kind of, it's okay for you?
Yeah, this explains really well.
Okay.
I'm really happy the way she has explained. There is something
Yes.
wrong with the phone. I'm just struggling with this mute, unmute, just a bit.
Okay.
So yeah,
So
I'm really
are
glad.
there any more questions or any more comments from the online audience? So this is one part which when in the sub you were talking about Dastane Mir Hazma, Hamza.
Hamza.
So yeah, I was just wondering, does this kind of also has a performance element to it?
Oh, it
Like
absolutely does.
it's a kind of, it could be like sometimes you have like dance,
Oh,
drama, theater.
oh yes, absolutely. Dastane Amir
Mm.
Hamza has been performed for ages, and
Mm.
it's been particularly, I must mention him, Mahmood Farooqi Saab's work on the revival of Dastan Goi, and the way he's been performing it with his team in India is wonderful to see. And because again, this story comes from, it's part of the Indian subcontinent's culture. It's very much rooted there. So it's not it's very, very performative in nature. And here too, Dastan Goi sessions are held where Dastane Amir Hamza Sahib Quran, the adventures of Amir Hamza, the conqueror, the valiant, the gallant, heroic character, they are, oh, it is very performative in nature. And it can be, that's again something that you can do with oral stories. You can turn them into all sorts of performing pieces, and they still manage to resonate with their audiences.
And it's good to know, as you have mentioned, that the Urdu kind of the young generations are more eager and kind of motivated to to learn
Oh
and
yes.
to know about this storytelling.
Just to add here, Dr. Beena, the storytellers who are working with StoryKit, they're all young persons. They are young students from universities across the country. These are people who are wanting to not only preserve their language, they want to be a part of it, and they want to be a part of this living, breathing literary scape. And they're doing so because, again, it's not a greatly paying opportunity. It is something that you do because you have this great deal of affection for a language and you want to preserve it. It's not always about the gains. The gains are what we see when we see children, when we see adults, when we see everybody around us feeling entertained and learning Urdu. It's that's what we're gaining from this process.
So if there are no more questions or comments, we can conclude our session. Thank you all for your active participation and thoughtful questions, which have truly enriched the session. We hope that you all found the session insightful and inspiring. Every month, we conduct this SAARC Talk series. For details and future notifications, please subscribe to our SAARC Cultural Center Facebook page, and it's also given in the informations are also given in the SAARC website. I wish Intsab Sahi all the best in our efforts to preserve and celebrate Urdu storytelling. Wishing everyone a wonderful evening.